A lot of us go through a rebellious phase, but I was a complete monster. I swear I had genuine reasons, though. I'm not saying that to make you feel bad or anything, but I had a pretty rough childhood. I never knew my parents and spent my entire life in the foster care system. I bounced from house to house at least 7 times a year. I know what you're thinking. How could someone just give away a kid in need? Well, I'll admit that I was the one to blame, in the beginning at least. Before I go into any of that, though, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to My Story Animated to hear more crazy stories about people just like you. If you do, you'll get tons of likes on your next post. Trust me, I was pretty Insta-famous for a while. See, that was part of my problem, actually. I was convinced that the family life wasn't for me at all. Despite the fact that all my foster families were pretty nice, I was really rude and mean. I only cared about making videos, partying, and taking selfies. I got into the habit of stealing things and skipping school. When I didn't get my way, I would scream and shout at the top of my lungs. I'm embarrassed to think back to this day, but I think it describes the old me pretty well. I was living with this nice old couple and 4 other foster kids. They forbade me from partying on school nights, but I went out anyway and stole their car to get there. When I came home, all they did was ground me and take away my cell phone. I got so mad that I screamed and smashed their things. I made the old lady cry. I feel horrible thinking back about it. I just couldn't control myself. I don't know how I was ever that mean. I wasn't evil, though. I was just a troubled child. I actually had some outbursts that had nothing to do with misbehaving. Sometimes I had horrible nightmares that would wake me up screaming. Mixed with my behavior problems, a lot of foster homes didn't have the patience for my outbursts, hence moving around so much. By the time I was 16, I had been through every single foster home in my city. I tried to keep cool, but I was honestly terrified I'd end up stuck in an orphanage until I was an adult. Now, I may have been a monster, but I was nothing compared to the residents of the local orphanage. It was filled with the worst kids I knew, and I didn't want to end up there with them. They would have beaten me up. I wasn't nearly as tough as I liked to pretend. When my caseworker walked into the room, I burst into tears. I begged her not to ship me off to the orphanage. She thought for a second and said she might have an option for me, but I wasn't gonna like it. How bad could it be? I asked. Yeah, I know what you're thinking. That's exactly what someone says before they walk into the worst possible situation. My caseworker made a quick phone call and let me know that I was good to go. I would be leaving right this instant. I picked up my backpack, which was full of everything I owned, and was put on a bus to the middle of nowhere. I had no clue where I was going. As the bus started driving off, I Googled some pictures of the place. It wasn't even on the map. I was going to the middle of nowhere. I started screaming. I ran over and begged the bus driver to stop, but he said it was already too late. I posted one last selfie letting my followers know that I was going to be taking a break from social media. Something told me that there wasn't going to be any service out in the middle of nowhere. I was a city girl obsessed with the internet and gaming, and I couldn't even watch My Story Animated where I was going. My cell phone service cut out maybe a half hour into the trip. 3 hours later, I was awoken by the bus stopping. I looked out the window and saw this huge, creepy mansion. I thought it was the town hall to get my papers or something. I was shocked when the bus driver said, "We're here." I told him he was supposed to take me to my new home directly. "Oh, sweetie." He laughed. "This is it." Then he just drove off, leaving me alone with my backpack at the entrance to the mansion. I walked cautiously up to the door and knocked a couple of times with no answer. I called out but still got no answer. I saw a letter taped to the door and decided to open it. It read, "Welcome home, Charlotte. Please let yourself in." Sure enough, the door was unlocked. It creaked open slowly and creepily. I walked right in and decided to explore. Now, I know I said the outside was scary, but that was nothing compared to the interior of the house. It felt like it was straight from the Addams Family. There were huge portraits on the wall with group photos of at least 20 kids, all dressed up in old-timey clothes, as well as all types of taxidermy. It looked like the set of a horror movie or a cult, and I didn't even know the half of it yet. You know that sixth sense feeling you get after watching a scary movie late at night? Like the one where you can feel someone watching you? Well, I got that feeling and all the hair on the back of my neck stood up. I flipped around and saw a serious-looking nun staring at me and frowning. She looked me up and down in disgust. I was wearing pretty short shorts and a crop top, so I could tell she was judging me. I waved hello and tried to introduce myself, but she ignored me. She just started writing something down in the notebook she was holding in her hand. She lifted it up and showed me what she wrote. "No one speaks here." That was weird. I asked if it was because of some kind of medical condition or religion. She simply flipped the page and wrote down, "Follow me," and started walking away while I was still trying to talk to her. I followed her down some winding halls until we ended up in a room with a couple of beds in it. She led me to one bed that had some stuff on it, including folded clothes, a notebook, a pencil, and a piece of paper that said, "This is your new bed. Please use the paper. It will be easier for everyone. Please change into your new clothes." I thought the scariest thing about the mansion was the giant taxidermied bear in the entrance, but I was dead wrong. I picked up my new clothes and nearly fainted. See, if nothing else, I was pretty. I had to give up my city and internet, but I did not want to give up my looks. I kept up with all the latest trends and was an aspiring Instagram model. This outfit was as far away from fashionable as possible. It was a gray dress that reached all the way to the floor and buttoned up to my neck. The dress was like a hideous costume straight from the 1700s. Maybe it was a good thing that there was no internet here because I wouldn't be caught dead in this outfit. I turned to argue with the nun, but she was already holding up her paper that now said, "Hurry, child." Now, I was rebellious, but nuns are scary. I did as she said and made my way to meet the other people here. It took a couple of days to meet everyone. There were a lot of people. All in all, there were about 23 girls living with me between the ages of 7 and 14. This made me the oldest and pretty much the role model to everyone here. It turned out that most of them had severe hearing problems, and some of them were completely mute. Talking was out of the question, so they all communicated through notebooks or sign language. The nun could read lips, but the rest of them were never really exposed to speech. The girls were very quick to take me in. They showed me the fun of country living, and trust me, I was a skeptic. They helped me learn how to braid my hair, and one girl even taught me how to sew a bit so I could personalize my outfit a little more. Sure, it felt like a cult, and that should have been a warning sign, but you have no idea how nice it was to finally feel like I fit in somewhere. It was so weird getting used to the fact that no one could hear me, but it was kind of nice that I didn't need to worry about my screaming nightmares waking anyone up. I liked to think of myself as strong and independent, so I really enjoyed not having to wake up from a nightmare to people fussing over me. I even made my first real friend. She was the second oldest, and her name was Kirsten. She was super awkward, but I really appreciated having someone my age to connect with. She even taught me sign language. I got pretty used to this new lifestyle, waking up at dawn, harvesting all the vegetables, and I hadn't even spoken a single word. I went from an Instagram model who wore hot clothes and got in trouble to a saint. Like figuratively and literally. Not only was I staying out of trouble and gaining control of my behavior, but the other girls looked up to me like I was a prophet. They asked me tons of questions about life on the outside. Most of the girls were brought here as toddlers or infants, so they had no exposure to TVs, malls, or even processed sugar. This one girl, Susie, asked me how you feed the people that live on TV so that they can perform for you. Kirsten's favorite thing for me to describe was cheese puffs. The concept of such a treat was godly and fantasy-like to her. I told her that I promised I would bring her back some once I moved out. She always got weird when I brought up leaving. I always assumed it was because she would miss me, and I was about to find out it was a little more complicated than that. Don't get me wrong, though. I was ready to leave. I appreciated everything they did. Even after everything, I don't regret the time I spent there. Still, I was counting down the days to my 18th birthday when I could move out. That's when everything changed. I wrote the nun asking what I should do about moving back to the city, and she got really weird. She asked what about everything here, the life I had with the other children. She asked why I wasn't happy. I assured her that nothing was wrong and I loved them all. I told her I wanted to go out into the real world, get a job, and fall in love. She seemed to understand, but she said something next that made me question everything. "I guess you won't get to meet him if you leave," she sighed. She explained that there was a new boy coming to work at the estate as a gardener the week after my 18th birthday. She'd never mentioned him before, but she said she thought she would keep it as a surprise because she really thought we would hit it off. I should have sensed something was suspicious, but she convinced me to stay. Try not to judge me. I hadn't seen a boy in years. I have to admit, I was pretty happy I did, at least at first. The boy came all right. He was everything I hoped for. He was handsome and seemed very nice. Not only that, he could speak and hear just like me. The nun immediately introduced us and even encouraged me to speak, something she hadn't done the entire time I lived there. It felt so weird talking after a couple of years of complete silence. I was embarrassed by how poorly the words came out and how weak my voice was. But he was super sweet and showed a keen interest in me. He even called my little voice super cute. At first, it was really flattering, but there was something off about him. For one thing, he was very close to the nun and always had private meetings with her. Another problem was that I never actually saw him gardening. One day, out of nowhere, he proposed to me after only knowing me for a week. I freaked out. He was very insulted, explaining he came here and paid big money to take me as his wife. He was promised that I would be submissive, and refusing his proposal was not submissive. He paid the nun for me? I freaked out and ran to my room to pack. That's when the nun came in and tried to explain everything. But this time, she spoke to me. She'd lied about being mute. She explained how she needed money for her medical expenses, and a dowry was the only logical thing to do, and the girls weren't fit for life in the real world. I told her that she needed to give the girls a chance. The world wasn't as scary as she made it out to be. Freedom was everything. The nun simply apologized. I thought she was coming around, but she locked me in the room. I screamed for help, but all of the children were deaf. The only people who could hear me were the nun and the crazy man who wanted to marry me. There was nowhere to go and no one to help me. I only had one option to avoid living in my room for the rest of my life. I agreed to marry him. I put on a big show and he fell for me immediately. Kirsten slipped me a note. She said I wasn't the first person the nun had married off, and they all disappeared shortly after. She knew that she would be next, as the second oldest, so she begged me to follow her plan so we could break the cycle. The nun was grooming submissive girls to marry off to weird men when they turned 18. On the day of the wedding, I pretended to be sick, very sick. The girl who helped me offered to accompany me to the hospital. She wrote a note to the nun explaining that my fever was very high and it was too dangerous for the nun to come near me. She was suspicious and insisted she come. The girl and I got into the car first, and when the nun tried to hop in, we pushed her to the ground, locked the doors, and drove off. We drove over 40 minutes before we found a town. There, we told the police everything that had happened. We were raised on a crazy wife farm. That's not even the craziest part of the story. See, when the police drove out there, they found the mansion, but it was completely empty. They had to use search dogs, which led them to another disturbing discovery. Underneath the farm we worked on, there was a huge secret. All the money she got from selling brides was used to build a giant underground bunker. She was part of a huge church, which included every family she sold the brides to. The kids were all rescued, but the nun was never found. Kirsten and I still live with each other. We are in the process of opening up our own foster home. We still keep in touch with some of the other girls we lived with. And yes, we have cheese puffs almost every day. Still, I can't help thinking she's out there somewhere, plotting her revenge. Sometimes I find crosses left in random places. The worst thing that happened last night, though, I was looking through my camera for some funny photos I'd taken when I saw pictures of Kirsten and I sleeping. I always thought I could sense someone peering at us in the middle of the night, but I chalked it up to my usual nightmares. I don't know if I should tell Kirsten or not, but I'm running out of excuses for why we need to move to a new apartment every month.